I'm going to disclose the facts as they are. I mean, whether they're dead or alive, I'm going to tell the same story because that's my job, is to get to the truth of the matter. My name is Greg Kading. I retired from the LAPD back in 2010 after spending 25 years in law enforcement. In the LAPD, I was assigned to our robbery homicide division, who handled most of the more higher profile type of homicides and robberies in Los Angeles. Before I got assigned to the Biggie Smalls investigation, I really knew very little about hip hop. I didn't follow that genre of music. I was more of a classic rock and roll guy. Back in the 1990s, there was a lot of gangster rap, and much of the attention that got was because it was directed at the police. So there was already a kind of a hostility between these two subcultures of law enforcement and gangs. I got involved or assigned to Biggie Smalls' murder in 2006, so that was 9 years after he had been killed. It was considered a cold case because there was a lawsuit being waged against the city of Los Angeles and against the police department, and there was concern of a conspiracy involving LAPD officers. I had the good fortune of having a lot of experience with gangs, a lot of experience in narcotic investigations, and experience in homicides. And those are the three ingredients that we needed to bring together to understand what happened in these murders. Typically in a cold case, when you get a case like Biggie's that's 9 years after the fact, most all of the traditional methods of investigation have been exhausted. So we knew that we were going to have to get people into a position where they were compelled to talk. We knew that we were going to have to corner them and give them options of either going to prison or cooperating and telling us what they knew. The key figures in the murders of Biggie and Tupac are, of course, their labels, headed by Sean Combs, which is Bad Boy, Biggie's label, and Suge Knight, which is Death Row, Tupac's label. If you look at it like a pyramid and you had Bad Boy Records with Sean Combs and Death Row Records with Suge Knight, and then beneath them was their rappers, Biggie and Tupac, and then beneath them was their entourages or gang associates, which were the Crips and the Bloods. The link between the two cases was this history of violence that had been taking place between members of Bad Boy Records and their Crip entourage, and then the members of Death Row Records and their Blood entourage. So there had been conflicts brewing for almost 2 years, with confrontations and a war of words and just disrespecting, and you go back and piece all of those little elements together and you can see how it fueled the fire, which led up to the shootings of both Tupac and Biggie. Orlando Anderson is absolutely, positively the murderer of Tupac Shakur. Sean Combs was associated back in New York with a high-level drug dealer named Eric Martin. He was known as Zip. Well, Zip was getting his cocaine and his PCP from a West Coast gang member who was a Crip named Keffe D. Keffe D's nephew is Orlando Anderson. He's the individual that got into a fight with Tupac Shakur the night that Tupac was shot. Orlando Anderson's the one that was in the backseat of the white Cadillac that pulled up alongside and shot Tupac. So you've got Combs, Martin, Keffe D, who was also in that white Cadillac and had secured the gun, gave it to his nephew, and his nephew shot and killed Tupac. In 1998, Orlando Anderson was trying to collect a drug debt. He was in Compton at a car wash, and he got into a confrontation where guns were pulled out, a shooting, an exchange of gunfire, and Orlando Anderson was killed at that time in 1998. There's a pretty good chance that Orlando Anderson would have been charged had more time been given to put the case together. But him being dead obviously makes him immune from prosecution. Well, for Sean Combs, I mean, what are his choices really? I mean, is he going to come out and confess to his association with the killers of Tupac Shakur? I mean, that would be professional suicide. He doesn't have a lot of choice but to try to distance himself from the facts as they are. But you also have to understand Combs' position at the time. And it's very understandable, this sense of fear and dread and desperation that he was facing, because he knew that Suge Knight and Suge Knight's goon squad, his gang member associates, were after Combs. They held him responsible for the murder of one of Suge Knight's best friends in Atlanta, a guy named Jake Robles. So this conflict just continued to fuel itself. Combs saw that it wasn't going to be resolved peacefully, and he protected himself by affiliating with these Crip gang members. And they took upon themselves to then kill Tupac Shakur. Biggie was killed by an associate of Suge Knight's. He hired a guy named Poochie to track down Biggie at the Peterson Auto Museum in March of 1997 and wait for him outside, and he pulled alongside and shot into the side of the car and killing Biggie. Poochie was a blood gang member from Compton, well known to Suge Knight, well known to those in Suge Knight's circle. Poochie was a known gunman, a known violent gang member, and he was the perfect guy to recruit for that job. We don't know that Poochie acted alone. We know Poochie was involved, but whether or not he had layoff guys or spotters, we don't know. In 2002, he's riding his motorcycle up Central Avenue. A gunman pulls up behind him and shoots him 10 times in the back and kills him. And so now Poochie's dead. So by the time we get the information about Poochie from the co-conspirator, he's no longer chargeable either, much like Orlando Anderson. We have the confession of a co-conspirator that points directly at Poochie. We had a history of knowledge of Poochie's association with Suge Knight, but when this intermediary came to our attention, there's a girl that we call her Teresa Swan. She was a baby mama to Suge Knight. She identified Poochie as the person that had been solicited to do the murder, provided other details that were only known to law enforcement, and said that Suge Knight had solicited it from jail. Seems that fate has caught up with Suge Knight. A couple years ago, he ran over a guy at a burger stand in Compton, killing him, a guy named Terry Carter, and Suge was charged with that murder and was sentenced to 28 years in prison. And so we knew that with this information, the LAPD was going to be out from under this grand lawsuit that they had been faced with. Even though they would never agree that I should go public about an unsolved case technically, they also realized that we're educating the public and it's changing the public's perception of what happened in Biggie's murder, and that namely the LAPD had nothing to do with it. I'm going to disclose the facts as they are. I mean, whether they're dead or alive, I'm going to tell the same story because that's my job, is to get to the truth of the matter. I would never provide information or falsely accuse somebody unless I had the evidence to support and back up the claims that were being made. The fact that these people are dead and unprosecutable, that's difficult for the case. But for me to talk about it, I don't care if they're dead or alive or not, I'm going to say the same thing.